And I thought I had some insight as to why the economy had tanked. It's because so many of the wannabe whiz kids I'd gone to high school and college and law school with had gone to Wall Street and helped create these exotic financial instruments, these derivatives, these mortgage-backed securities that crashed the economy. And so I thought, what a train wreck. We have to do better than that. And so I asked myself, well, what would I want people to do instead of go to Wall Street and try and become whiz kids? Or now head to Silicon Valley and try to make the app of the century or whatever. And the vision I came up with was to come to a place like Las Vegas or Detroit or Cleveland or Baltimore or St. Louis or Birmingham and start a business. That was the vision. But having started a business and failed, I knew that it was unrealistic to say, hey, go start a business someplace. So I thought, well, what would be more realistic is if I were to have them do what I did, which is work with a more experienced entrepreneur for a number of years, and then if they wanted to start a business, have some seed money waiting for them. So the joke I used to tell at this point was that if you were a young, ambitious, somewhat directionless young person in this country, and you tell your parents that you're going to go to law school, your parents will say it's a great idea, it's easy to find law school, and the government will give you an oh-so-helpful $100,000 loan to go, no questions asked, right? And if you were to go to your parents and say, I'm going to start a business, your parents will say that's a terrible idea, it's hard to find, and no one's going to give you a $100,000 loan. So there's no mystery that we have this oversupply of indebted, unhappy law school graduates and an undersupply of people starting businesses around the country. I quit my job and started an organization that I thought could help balance the scales. It's called Venture for America. I put some of my own money to seed the organization. And then I started calling rich friends with this question: do you love America? And then the smart among them said, what does it mean if I say yes to this question? And I said, at least $10,000. And then 12 of them said, I love America for $10,000. It's like, I thought you did. So their money plus my money equaled, a couple $100,000, and then they got into the millions, helped create thousands of jobs in 15 cities around the country. I received awards and accolades from the Obama administration, got to bring my wife to meet the president. He has very large hands. It's my main memory. And my in-laws were very excited about me for like a week. They were like, oh, look at that. I got to sign out with the president. But unfortunately, I had this sinking feeling during this time that for every job that I was creating, there were tens or hundreds of jobs that were being lost to bigger economic forces and trends. And I had never been to these parts of the Midwest and the South that I was now working in. And I was blown away by the gulf between regions, where if you fly between St. Louis and San Francisco or Michigan and Manhattan, you feel like you're crossing decades and dimensions and ways of life and not just a few time zones. How many of you are from the Midwest? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, many know I'm talking about the South. So this was new to me. I was a Northeastern product, and so when I explored the Midwest and the South over these 7 years, I was like, wow, this is not what I thought was going on. And then Donald Trump became our president in 2016. Now, if you're here in this room, you might have been sad about that outcome. All of us, though, have family members and friends and neighbors who were excited about it. They said, this is the bet that tens of millions of us want to make on the narcissist reality TV star. And to me, this was a red flag. This led me to believe, okay, here I am getting patted on the back for helping create thousands of jobs. And then Donald Trump becomes president because we are automating away millions of jobs. We started with manufacturing. And where were those jobs? Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, Iowa. If that set of states sounds familiar, those are the swing states that Donald Trump needed to win and did win. He won them all. And we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs that were mostly in those states. And what we did to those jobs, we are now doing to retail jobs, call center jobs, truck driving jobs, and on through the economy. How many of you have noticed stores closing where you live here in Las Vegas? Why are those stores closing? Amazon, one word answer. Amazon's soaking up another $20 billion in business every single year. How much did Amazon pay in taxes last year? Zero. That is your math, Las Vegas. 20 billion out, zero back. Most common job in most of the country is working as a retail clerk. The average retail clerk is a 39-year-old woman making between $9 and $10 an hour. What is her next opportunity going to be when her store or mall closes? When you call a customer service line of a big company and you get the software, the bot, you probably do the exact same thing I do, which is you dial 000, human, to get someone on the line, right? Raise your hand, that's what you do. Yeah, we all do that. We hate that software. But 2 or 3 years from now, the software is going to sound like this. Hey, Andrew, how's it going? What can I do for you? It's going to be fast, seamless, delightful. You might not even know it's software. What's that going to mean for the 2.5 million Americans who work in call centers right now making $14 an hour? I just talked to 70 CEOs in New York City. I asked them, how many of you are looking at having AI replace back office clerical workers in your companies? Guess how many hands went up out of 70? All 70. The fact is you could fire that CEO if they weren't looking at making that switch. How many of you all know a truck driver here in Nevada? Driving a truck's the most common job in 29 states in this country. 3.5 million truckers, 94% men, average age 49, make about $48,000 a year. My friends in California are working on trucks that can drive themselves. Why do they care about self-driving trucks so much? For the money. $168 billion a year in cost savings if you can automate away truckers. They tell me they are 98% of the way there. Now that sounds very impressive, but you can't have semi-trucks smashing into things at a 2% error rate. Like, oh, we got it mostly right. And the robot trucks are really bad with snow. That's one reason why they're always testing them in Arizona. Because if the road markings get covered, then the computer gets confused as to what to do. So how can they crack that nut? How can they get hold of this $168 billion a year? The way they think they can get there is by equipping the trucks with teleoperating software. Remember the first time you watched TV on your phone? Remember that? I was like, wow, we do that now? That's 3G. Right now we're rolling out 5G around the country. And the plan is to make it so that if a truck's not sure what to do, it alerts a person sitting in a warehouse in Arizona who then beams into the truck and drives it like a video game. Doesn't literally beam in, but all he has to do is have his cameras mounted on the front and then he'll see at it, so it's like he's there. And then the computer says, okay, I've got it again, and then he beams back out. What do you think the ratio will be between teleoperators and the 3.5 million truckers? 1 to 10, 1 to 50. It's certainly not going to be 1 to 1, right? You're not going to have 3.5 million people in the teleoperating facility. What's that going to mean for the 3.5 million truckers or the 7 million Americans who work at truck stops, motels, and diners that rely upon the trucks stopping and the trucker getting out and having a meal? You can think about our highway system as sort of a circulatory system, and the trucks are like blood cells. They're going through, and then the blood cells like drop off stuff. The truckers get out, they take a nap, they do things like that. But then with robot trucks, the blood cells never stop. It's going to gut many, many towns in the interior of the country. Something like 10% of jobs in Nebraska support trucking, as an example. So if all of a sudden the truck doesn't stop, the truckers, odds are they're not in a union, because only 13% of American truckers are in a union. 87% mom and pop businesses, they took out massive loans to buy their own trucks, very oftentimes. Imagine having your life savings tied up in trucks, and then all of a sudden a robot truck hits the highway. What's your reaction? This is all real. And I love being here in Nevada because this is ground zero for all of these economic changes. Nevada is the #1 state in the entire country for the proportion of jobs that will be impacted by automation and technology. What are the biggest employers here in the state? Hospitality, retail, gaming, call centers, administrative and clerical, trucking and transportation, warehouse and fulfillment and shipping. These are the sectors that are the highest proportion of automatable tasks and jobs. How many of you saw that MGM just fired hundreds of employees and brought in robot bartenders? You see that? You think they'll be the last to do that? Let's say the robot bartender costs $250,000, which is approximately what it costs. If you're a big public company, all you have to do is play it out long enough and say, okay, that means I get paid back in approximately 6 years. But if you're a public company, you make that move every single time. The fact is, tourists kind of like the robot bartenders. They think it's cool. They take pictures with them. How many of you have seen a self-serve kiosk in a fast food restaurant? All of you, right? Food service, third most common job in the country. McDonald's sells self-serve kiosk in every location by 2021. They're starting with the front of house, they're moving to the back of the house because there are a lot of repetitive tasks in the back, too. Donald Trump is not the cause of all of our problems. He's a symptom. He's a manifestation. If you turn on cable news, you would think he's our president. Why? Because of Russia, racism, Facebook, FBI, Hillary Clinton, emails, all mashed together into some bizarre stew. But the numbers tell the clear story that we blasted away these millions of manufacturing jobs, largely in the swing states. And there's a straight line up between the adoption of industrial automation and the movement to Trump. I've been in these towns. If you close that manufacturing plant and the jobs disappear, blue goes to red in an awful hurry. And right now, what are we seeing in this country? You're seeing an urban-rural divide that actually parallels that, because we're depleting rural areas very quickly. If you are in a rural part of the country, your kids feel like they have to leave in order to have the kind of access to opportunities that they want. Your property taxes just keep on creeping up because when population goes down, then you need to tax people more heavily to pay for the local schools, even though the number of students in that school is shrinking. They're caught in a very nasty cycle, and it's turning blue to red in much of the country. So I unpacked all this stuff in 2017. I was like, oh my gosh, we're going through the greatest economic transformation in the history of our country, what experts are calling the fourth industrial revolution. When is the last time you heard a politician say the words fourth industrial revolution? Probably just now. And I'm barely a politician. There's one reason you like me here in Nevada. I like you too. My first move was not to run for president. My first move was to go to DC and say, what are we going to do about the fact that immigrants are getting scapegoated for issues they have next to nothing to do with? And it's really technology and automation in this fourth industrial revolution. And what do you think the folks in DC said to me when I asked them, what are we going to do? Get out of here, nothing. The real answers I got were, number one, we can't talk about that. Number two, we should study that further. And number oh, it's to laugh. And number three, we must educate and retrain all Americans for the jobs of the future. And I said, that sounds pretty good. But I looked at the studies. You all want to guess how effective the government-funded retraining programs were for the manufacturing workers who lost their jobs in the Midwest? 0 to 15%, that's right, they're a total fail. Industry-wide, you're looking at approximately 20% success rates. Of that group of workers, half left the workforce and never worked again. So the question is, how did they survive? Of that group, half then filed for disability. Because the truth is, if you were working in a manufacturing plant for a while, you probably did have some kind of physical ailment that you could fight your way through if your job depended on it. But then you lose your job and you're looking around and then you're all of a sudden, it's like, you know what? My back freaking's killing me. I mean, and it's real, their back was killing them. So half of that group then filed for disability. And you then saw surges in suicides and drug overdoses to the point where American life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years in a row. Y'all want to know the last time America's life expectancy declined for 3 years in a row? The Spanish flu of 1918. You have to go back 100 years to a global pandemic that killed millions. The reason you have to go back that far is that it's highly unusual for life expectancy to decline in a developed country even once. That's not normal. Ordinarily it just goes in one direction, up. And now it started to go the nasty direction because suicides and drug overdoses have both overtaken vehicle deaths for the first time in American history. So when I didn't say all of this to the folks in DC, but I said, hey, retraining doesn't work. Then they were like, well, I don't know what to tell you. There's been a good meeting. And one person said something to me that brought me here to you all. He said, Andrew, you're in the wrong town, because no one here in DC is going to do anything about this. And the only way that we're going to do anything about it is if you create a wave in other parts of the country and bring that wave crashing down on our heads. And I heard this and I said, challenge accepted. I'll be back in about 2 years. So that was almost 2 years ago, and I'm here with you to help create this wave and bring it crashing down on our heads. Again, Nevada is ground zero. But I will say, Nevada, you have the future of the country in your hands. There is no way this nomination process is decided by the time it gets to you, February 22nd. You know, you had like a fragmented field, and not that many Nevadans caucus. So it does not take that many of you to actually steer the entire country in a different direction. It's the magic of this place. Most Americans look up and they say, my vote doesn't matter that much. The pipes are just clogged full of lobbyist money, and I can't do much about it. They are generally correct. There's not much they can do about it. But you can do something about it. If you decide to present a different vision, if you say we need to rewrite the rules of the 21st century economy to work for us and not the corporate bottom line, then we can flush the pipes and make it a reality very, very quickly. I'm here before you either 4th, 5th, or 6th in national polls for the nomination. And my campaign raised $10 million in the last quarter alone, in increments of only $30 each. So my fans are almost as cheap as Bernie's. But there are a lot of them, a lot of you. This is a very inexpensive and wholesome gang. It's really very low initiation. No corporate PAC money. This is the grassroots revolution to flush the pipes and then present a different vision for what our economy can look like to the rest of the country. So what is that vision? How do you actually solve for the fact that literally 50% of the jobs in Nevada are subject to possible automation in the next 20 years? I mean, really, you really are ground zero for this stuff. You're starting to see it around you. It's starting to take off. So the question is, what can you do if retraining programs are a flop most of the time? If you're here today, at some point you heard this. There's an Asian man running for president who wants to give everyone $1,000 a month. Remember that? And the first time you heard that, you said, ha ha, that's a gimmick, that's a joke, that will never happen. But this is not my idea. Thomas Paine was for this at the founding of the country. He called it the citizen's dividend. Martin Luther King championed this in the 1960s, called it the guaranteed minimum income, and it is what he was fighting for the day he was assassinated in 1968.
That's true.
1,000 economists, including Milton Friedman, endorsed it in the 60s, and it was so mainstream it passed the U.S. House of Representatives twice in 1971 under Richard Nixon. It's called a Family Assistance Plan. It's an income floor for all Americans. And then 11 years later, one state passed a dividend where now everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year. Right now, no questions asked. Yeah, what state is that?
Alaska.
And how does Alaska pay for it?
Oil.
And what is the oil of the 21st century? Technology, data, AI, self-driving cars and trucks. A study just came out that said our data is now worth more than oil. How many of you saw that? How many of you got your data check in the mail? Did it get lost? Oh no, it went to quote unquote the right place, which was Facebook, Amazon, Google. They're profiting to the tune of tens of billions of dollars off of our data while we don't see a dime. It's very much like what's happening with Amazon, soaking up $20 billion in business while we don't see a dime. You see how the 21st century economy is working? It's this winner-take-all economy, and it's not advantaging us. That's for damn sure. No. I actually know some of the people that are the direct beneficiaries, and some of them are perfectly happy, like with the current state of affairs. But some of them are patriots and parents and Americans, and said, "Hey, this is not going to work for anyone if it reaches this level of extreme." In Alaska, they call this the oil check, and they've loved it for 40 years. In America, we're going to call this the tech check, and we're all going to love it. And I want you all to think about, after I'm president, thanks to you, and then we get these dividends into your hands, how will you spend the money in real life?
Local economy.
Go to the dentist.
Pay down debt.
It'll go towards the things you're spending money on right now, right? So it'll go to school costs and food and daycare expenses and the occasional night out and car repairs you've been putting off and Little League signups. How much of it would stay right here in Nevada?
All of it.
Most of it. Some of it would float off to the cloud, like upgrade your Netflix subscription and then get a blender on Amazon. I've had my eye on the really good blender, one that's super loud. But most of it would stay right here in Nevada. This is how we rewrite the rules to work for us. This is the trickle-up economy. From our people, our families, and our communities up. And now I'm being told to make this new trickle-up gesture. I'm working on it. The trickle-up economy would make us stronger, healthier, less stressed out, mentally healthier, would improve our decision-making, our relationships, decreases domestic violence, decreases hospital visits. We can do it. There's nothing stopping the majority of citizens of a democracy from declaring ourselves a dividend. Nothing at all. They did it in Alaska. They've done it around the world. We're going to do it here. The truth is, if we don't do it, we are in for an incredibly rough time. Because as artificial intelligence leaves the labs and the call centers start replacing people with software and the robot trucks hit the highways, like what's that going to mean for Americans around the country? You can see already what's happening. We're turning against each other. We have this mindset of scarcity because 78% of us are living paycheck to paycheck. Almost half of us can't afford an unexpected $400 bill. How many of you have the sense that America is getting less reasonable, less rational, nastier, more subject to bad ideas. That is exactly what you would expect to happen in a population that can't pay its bills. Studies have shown that if you can't pay your bills, you have a mindset of scarcity because you just have one foot in front of the other and you're like, oh, I just need to figure out like how I'm gonna make ends meet. And it has the functional impact of decreasing your IQ by 13 points, or 1 standard deviation. So we've actually gotten 1 standard deviation less reasonable, less rational, less optimistic, because we all have this boot on our throats. You get the boot off of your throat, then all of a sudden you can look up and say, wow, we really do need to activate on climate change. We actually need to solve some of these problems. Right now, if you go to someone and ask them about climate change and they can't pay their bills, what are they gonna say? Penguins can wait. You know, I've got bigger problems. And then the human nature reaction is to say, it's probably not much of a problem anyway. They're probably just exaggerating. You know what I mean? That's just human nature if you've got your heads down and you have this mindset of scarcity. What's the opposite of a mindset of scarcity?
Abundance.
Abundance, that's right. And of course, there's no such thing as complete abundance mindset. This, you know, it's like, but you can at least reverse the dominance of the scarcity mindset that right now is just prevalent in most of our lives. So this freedom dividend is actually not this far out idea. It's an historical American idea whose time has come. Now, how else can we rewrite the rules of the economy to work for us? How many of you were excited about GDP when you woke up this morning? You were like, I hope it's higher. I hope I make a big contribution today. You like, you know, have like some kind of GDP sign on your wall. That was ridiculous. We laughed about it. And I like to talk about my family. My wife's at home with our 2 boys right now, one of whom is autistic. How much does her work counted on GDP every year? 0. That's not just true for her, that's true for the 10 million stay-at-home parents around the country. And we know that's nonsense. We know the work they're doing is the most challenging and vital work there is. So if GDP is going this way, oh, thank you for that. They get a little phantom applause. It's like me and my, actually, I'm also, my wife mocks it. She calls it my penguin clap. So GDP is heading this direction, and life expectancy is heading the other. So which are you going to listen to? I mean, GDP is at record highs, also at record highs in the United States right now. Stress, financial anxiety, student loan debts, drug overdoses, suicides. So GDP, to me, is much less important than life expectancy. You know, we shouldn't be cheerleading like record levels of GDP if our people are dying younger. So if we were to transform our economic measures to actually correspond to how we're doing, that would actually get you excited if I said this got better in Nevada. Like, what would you change it to? Health and wellness, right? If I said health and life expectancy got better, you'd be like, oh, that's a pure good. What else like that? How about mental health and freedom from substance abuse? That would be an absolute good if I said, and that's one thing we can work on together. We need to work on because we have a mental health crisis in this country. How about clean air and clean water? How about childhood success rates? How about proportion of elderly who can retire in quality circumstances? There's an employment crisis in this country. I don't want to live in a country where senior citizens are working themselves to the bone until the day they die, and you walk into a convenience store and someone's just there like trying to make ends meet. That person should be, in my mind at least, like a teenager, like trying to afford like some beer money or something. As your president, I'll have the power to go down the street to the Bureau of Economic Analysis and say, hey, GDP, really old, out of date, it's been around for 100 years, and even the inventor 100 years ago said this is a terrible measurement of national well-being. We should never use it as that. And here we are, riding it off a cliff 100 years later. So I will modernize it to the American scorecard that includes our health and wellness and environmental sustainability and how our kids are doing and our mental health and deaths of despair. And I will present them to you every year at the State of the Union as the American scorecard on a PowerPoint deck. I will be the first president to use a PowerPoint deck at the State of the Union. And if you genuinely like that visual, then you should definitely join the Yang Gang. Because if you hated it, you should join us anyway. This is how we rewrite the rules of the economy to actually work for us in the 21st century. We're getting bludgeoned over the head with these phantom measurements. It's GDP, headline unemployment, and stock market prices. And none of the three of them have any relationship to how we are doing. And I can unpack them a little bit for you. Headline unemployment doesn't include people who drop out of the workforce, doesn't include the fact that 94% of new jobs are temp, gig, or contract jobs that don't have benefits, and you have to work more than one very often. Doesn't include the fact that 40% of recent college graduates are underemployed doing a job that doesn't require a degree. None of that stuff shows up in headline unemployment. They're just like, ooh, it's great. It is not great. Even Donald Trump as candidate, what did he say about the unemployment rate? He said it was fake news, like all this. Then he became president, all of a sudden it became real news. He was right the first time. It's been fake this whole time. Stock market prices, the bottom 80% of Americans own 8% of stock market wealth. The bottom 50% own essentially zero. Why on earth would you be cheerleading a stat that corresponds to the fortunes of the top 20% of your population? That doesn't make much sense. So these are the measures that they're actually using for our entire society. And raise your hand again if you run a business or organization. Imagine if you had the wrong measurements for your organization. How the heck is that organization going to do over time? Terribly, because you're going to be like chasing this wrong thing. That is where we are as a country right now. We need to actually get the economy working for us instead of seeing ourselves as inputs into this giant machine. Because the fact is the machine is going to grind up more and more of us. The machine is going to zero out more and more of us. One of the things I've said is, it doesn't matter if you're a hardworking, conscientious truck driver or a really sloppy one. The robot truck's better than both of you. Doesn't matter if you studied really hard as a radiologist to try and identify tumors on that film. The AI can see shades of gray that human eye cannot. We have to shake free of this confusion we have between economic value and human value and say, you know what, we have value independent of anything the market is saying. So this is the mission, and I have to say, here in Nevada, you have this responsibility, because if we don't take this message to the rest of the country in 2020, we've got 4 more years of your stores closing and the robot trucks starting to creep towards the highways and the AI getting smarter. We have to make a case for an economy that works for us, and we have to do it now. Donald Trump became our president in part because he got some of the problems right. And then he said he was going to make America great again. What did Hillary Clinton say in response?
It's already great.
America's already great. Remember that? That was not the right response. We have to acknowledge the depth and reality and severity of the problems that are racking our communities. But then we need real solutions that would actually work and improve our lives. What were Donald Trump's solutions? We're going to build a wall, we're going to turn the clock back, we're going to bring the old jobs back. We have to do the opposite of these things. We have to turn the clock forward. We have to accelerate our economy and society as quickly as possible and rewrite the rules so that it works for us. We have to evolve in the way we see ourselves and our work and our value. And I'm the ideal candidate for this job, Nevada, because the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math. Thank you very much. What does math stand for? Make America think harder, that's right.